Good afternoon. We welcome all of you to this session. We have wealth of experience sitting on the dais with representation from both Indian brands, international brands across sectors like QSRs, casual dining, patisseries, bakeries, and ice creams. What we plan to do is, in the first 30 minutes, we'll go through the dais with each one of sharing their views on the industry, their journey, and some of the experiences. And in the last 20 minutes, we plan to take questions from the audiences. Since I'm the only investor on the panel, let me begin with some opening remarks, how I see this industry evolving and what are the opportunities and challenges that we see as an investor in investing in this sector. So just a few lines on how we see the evolution of this industry. As all of you know that out-of-home dining is an age-old industry, but I would say the organized part, the organized food services, started taking roots in late 80s, early 90s, and the momentum really picked up, when some of the marquee international brands entered Indian market, likes of Domino's, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, Baskin-Robbins, which was in late 90s, and between 2000 to 2010, we saw proliferation of so many Indian brands and, of course, entry of many more multinational chains in the Indian market. And this was the time when actually the sector got the interest from a lot of PE and VC investors. The opportunity was huge, and there's a huge opportunity for consolidation, branding, and scalability. That drove the interest, and we saw, I think, more than 60 deals since then till now, totaling to about $600, $700 million, and is still one of the favorites for a lot of investors. If you look at the last 5 years, I think this has been one of the most unprecedented time for the industry. And the reason for this is that, for the first time, we are seeing the lines blurring between food retail, packaged food, and food services. So on one hand, we have conventional brick and mortar stores. On another hand, we have likes of Zomato's, Food Pandas, Just Eat, who's getting not only on rating but also into delivery models. And we have a new breed like of, let's say, Hola Chef or Fresh, which is even delivering, fresh cooked, chef cooked food at your doorsteps. So what does it mean for consumers, for entrepreneurs, for vendors, as well as for the investors? I think for consumers, clearly, he has the maximum choice in terms of what to eat, when to eat, where to eat. For vendors and for particularly the SMEs in the back end of the food supply chain, where most of our investments are, I think it has really opened floodgates of opportunities. Most of them now have sales teams exclusively catering to the HoReCa segment. And many of them also working very closely with both Indian brands and international brands on product development. So I think that's something which is really catching up. For entrepreneurs, clearly opportunity to innovate, and good innovation with strong management, strong execution is getting rewarded and funded. As an investor, I think good times again. 5 years back, we used to get one business plan from this industry every quarter. Now we get that like once in a fortnight on an average. So there are many more entrepreneurs looking at this sector. But having said that, let me also confess that the investing in this sector has become more challenging and riskier. And there's a reason for that. Because of the pace of change, what we're investing today, there's a good chance it may become outdated in 5 years' time. So one has to really, do a proper assessment whether you can, whether the trend would continue in like 5-7 years time frame, which is the typical investment period. It's like 2G, 3G, 4G coexisting, and 5G and 6Gs are knocking at your doors. So when we evaluate any business model coming from the industry, what we look for, we'll go back to basics or the fundamentals. And let me talk about 2 or 3 in the interest of time. The first one is the focus on back end. And when I say back end, I include central kitchen, I include product development, I include vendor development. I think that's the heart and nucleus of any good food services model. That if you have that in place, your ability to scale, your ability to cut cost, your ability to improve margins, your ability to introduce new products is far, far higher. So we typically evaluate the back end first before we look at the store locations or front end or positioning, etc. Second is unit economics. I think that is extremely key. You know, managing a chain of restaurants is no different from managing a stock portfolio. So if your 30% of stocks are making losses, there's a good chance that you will be making losses at the portfolio level. I think that's true for a chain also. If your 20-30% of stores are making losses, then there's a good chance that you'll be making cash losses at the corporate level. So, you know, we always tell entrepreneurs, you know, you decide your patience level with each store. If it's not working beyond 6 months, 9 months, you know, you need to trigger stop loss and exit the location. And the last one, I would say, is scalability. And I will let my panelists talk about it. But there are various dimensions to scalability. The number one is, of course, your ability to become multi-format. Number two is your ability to adopt to various locations, like malls, like high street, like airports, like college canteens, like corporate catering. You know, can brand be adopted to different locations and different retail environments? Third dimension is home delivery. I think we are increasingly finding that the economics improve significantly with home delivery component. In general, higher the share of home delivery, better is the economics. And the last but not the least is your ability to franchise. You know, how strong is the brand? You know, what is the right time for it to be franchisable? Can it be franchised from the day one? So these are, let's say, 3 or 4 key criteria for us when we look at investing in the sector. And at this point, let me bring in Dheeraj, who's done a wonderful job. He's sold more than 100 million vada pavs till date. He's going to open his 100th store pretty soon, and it's a 100% franchisee brand. So, Dheeraj, if you can share your journey in terms of how you went about it, and also focus a little bit on the real estate part, which I think is integral to going to new locations.
Okay, so I'll just quickly talk on the franchising part. Of course, as a business, we started off with our first 3 stores being company owned because we had to establish what is called as a proof of concept, that only vada pav in Mumbai is going to work, because there were very few believers in this at that time. And once we got that, then getting more franchisees as in to sign up and grow the business became easier. And in franchising, I think there are 2 things. One is people, I would say, you know, people who are looking at franchising their business, please franchise for the right reason. We don't franchise today because there is a shortage of funds. Today there is money available and someone can write a check of 50 crores if we make the right pitch to open only company-owned stores. But we choose to franchise because we feel our format is franchisable and it is faster to grow through that route. So, you know, therefore franchising for the right reason, which is the value addition which the franchisee gets through the business, not only for the money which he gets on board. So it's a very fine line. So you know, I'm part of the Franchise Association of India. That's why I thought I should bring this out. And of course, real estate, we all know, is the most important part of retail business. So in our early days, we made a lot of mistakes where some locations would do fantastically well. Another location would not do so great. So the location which did not do great, we started doubting our product. And we started doubting, you know, the taste and the quality and all of those things. But over time, we realized that it was, you know, more of getting the right location for the right product, which made, you know, the combination successful. Mm-hmm. So today, as in we probably, I would like to say, have done a PhD in searching for locations which would suit a Jumbo King business, which would be very different from a Baskin-Robbins business, or, you know, different from LSD or you know, Coco Berry or any of these things. So understanding where your product works, what consumer need is being fulfilled over there, I think getting that part of the equation right as a franchisor for us helps solve or does maximum value addition for the franchisee who comes to us.
Great. And let me bring Sanjay into this discussion now. Sanjay, of course, is one of the early entrants in the Indian market, started in 94, if I am correct.
Yeah.
And again, have more than 500 stores of Baskin-Robbins. So
560 plus.
Okay, 560 plus.
Yeah.
So do you share what Dheeraj is saying in terms of your ability to franchise your brand right from the beginning, and also if you can talk a little bit more about the experience of an international brand cracking the Indian market, since probably you have the most number of experience in that area.
Yeah, I think, from a perspective of franchising, the advantage is that we've got a proprietary product, okay? And I think that's where we really control things in terms of product consistency, product quality. That is something which no one can really tamper with. And so I think that's the single most important point, which has allowed us to franchise the concept and the brand. Because typically, if you don't have a proprietary product and you don't have any control over that, then there could be a lot of issues in quality. So we've managed that. Secondly, when we started, we followed the build, operate, and transfer. It's called the BOT model, which is build, operate, transfer. So I remember we built 3 stores. We tested the proof of principle, and then we franchised it out. Because first you got to make money. You need to believe in the model that you're going to make money in the unit economics. And that's when we started franchising it out. And I think it becomes very euphoric when when franchisees, prospective franchisees or investors actually look at a brand making money, And I would very proudly say that in the 560 stores we have, we've got about 400 odd franchisees. So we've created about 400 entrepreneurs. And that has actually allowed us to scale up. I think from a control perspective, locals are the best suited to manage businesses, okay? Because laws are different, connects are different with the authorities, etc. So currently we are in about 140 towns, 140 cities. I mean, though we are a little fragmented, but we are pretty dense in certain places. Like in Mumbai, we've got 80 stores. Which is significant. In Bangalore, we've got 70. In a place like Guwahati, we have 13 stores. I mean, typically at a distance of about 1.5 kilometers from each other. So I don't think there's a brand as successful. A place like Goa, we've got 28 stores. We have a footprint, from one end of Goa to the other. So I think typically we've got that model right. As you rightly covered, Hemendra, I think also the back end is extremely critical, because typically international brands, when they come in, if you realize, they spend a lot of time on getting the back end in place. Because if you get the if you get all the vendors right, you get the product right. So there's a lot of time spent on R&D, and then there's a lot of time spent on logistics. So when I talk about back end, the logistics is literally the backbone of the QSR business or the food industry. Because if you don't get that right, it's doomsday. And I think it's also important to cluster your approach, because if you fragment, then the logistics cost can kill you. So my advice is to any entrepreneur or any startup is work in clusters, because you get your economies of scale is better. You're able to get value for the money spent on media, advertisements, etc. And your brand equity is much stronger. Your monitoring, your operational monitoring is much stronger, because otherwise you'll need people all over. Again, from another single important thing I want to touch up is on deliveries. I think it's extremely strong even today, and I think in years to come it's just going to get better. There's just one statistic I would like to share, that the food spends of the total, eating out spends of the total food spends in the US is as high as 45 to 50%, which means typically half of their budget. And in India, it's still hovering around 18%. So the opportunity is really huge, And I think we are at the cusp of that. Another important statistic is that with this online ordering space, it's just getting larger now, and especially the internet mobile space, because India has 18 million smartphones today, and that's quite a big number.
Interesting, Sanjay. So you touched upon the importance of backend, and I think at this stage I will bring in Uday, who's developed a very fantastic regional brand, Nalas, in Chennai, and now expanding to other regions. I think he's one of the best appams, I guess, in Chennai city. So Uday, can you talk about how important is central kitchen, how important is backend to maintain the consistency, and which ultimately helps building your brand and customer loyalty? Can you touch upon those points?
Yeah, thank you, Mathur, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. At moment, we are having 15 outlets and 12 in Tamil Nadu, and that Tamil Nadu 12 is being catered from the central kitchen. That is just, if you want to scale up the business, then the central kitchen is inevitable. I think you need to have that because of the consistency of the product. Also, ensuring that today, I'm sure every entrepreneur of every corporate faces the problem of attrition. And you develop a good guy, and maybe after some time he has been either moved away from overseas or going out to the other corporates. It's inevitable. So you want to maintain the consistency to deliver to the consumer, then you need to have a central kitchen concept. Then if you supply there, even the guy move away, you can just ensure that quality is being delivered. In that way, but having said that, the logistics cost, transportation cost, considering the traffics in the country today, and it's a challenge. So we need to ensure that multiples and absolute logistic and supply chain is very important when you have a central kitchen concept. Though it's going to cost much more, but that should not be started if you are not having any expansion plans. If you want to scale up the business, then you need to have it, otherwise you should not go for it. That's what I could say about the central kitchen concept of it. Of course, the industry, as all my colleagues are definitely a franchise thing, which I have not geared up yet, because which I'll be gearing up very quickly. But also real estate is other challenge, which we also face the problem. So we are changing our formats on the real estates, and turnaround is important in the casual fine dining model. How long the guy who walks in, starting from soup to dessert, and also after that giving out the check, I think what is the time frame which you maintain? That's the front end. Back end is a quality consistency which you can maintain at the central kitchen and the production level, but the service level is important at the dining part of it. And that's where now, year after year, we are working on even a minute by minute, and today we have successfully achieved about 50 minutes turnaround from soup to dessert, and then giving the check. Because the more turnaround on my chair, it's money for me. Otherwise, it's not going to be a viable project for considering the real estate cost in the market. So we have to optimize the real estate cost by way of quick efficiency on the service front. So the quality front and the service front makes you successful. Yes, we have also very quick success in a span of 8 years. We are having almost 16 outlets. I think even that's strain our efficiency in some level, but like last year was generally the economy was slowed down. But how we survived is only by way of keeping the corporate overheads under a tight belt. I mean, sharpening the pencil every day on the back end. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult to survive. Also, but definitely the basic food, the appam which we are talking about is, today idli and dosas and vadas have become a national and global cuisine. And, but many people not aware that there is a subsequent other South Indian products of appam, idiyappam, paniyarams, and I don't know, this all Chettinadu cuisine tiffin items, the breakfast items. That is not been spelled out, and but I hope everybody would have gone through my website. We are consecutively 4th year on the Times Award thing. So that's what we want to take this to the global level. And scalability is now unavoidable for us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madhu.
Thanks to them. So I'll go to Nauzad, who's built a very strong brand in a highly fragmented category, which is bakeries and patisseries. So Nauzad, if you can talk about how did you conceive this idea, And since you're a very young brand, and there are a lot of young entrepreneurs sitting here, what are the challenges that you faced in year 1, year 2, and how did you overcome in that phase?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. We started LST as not particularly a bakery, or we started with fast food, but that worked only for a month. Eventually, the bakery business was really gearing up back then. We are a baby company. We are 3 years old, running into a fourth. So, and there was a lot of, there was no competition, but a lot of expansion. There could be a lot of you could say projectile. We could project a lot of business from them. But with one store, we had to give. Our model did not. Sorry. Our model was really successful back then, and then we gave out one franchisee out of Bombay, which started making money immediately, and also then we started another store in Bombay. Then we started expanding in Bombay, and then, like Uday said, a central kitchen is most important. We invested in a central kitchen, making it 5 stores. We are now 5 stores in Bombay. We have a store in Pune, we have a store in Surat, and we have a store, we are talking about stores somewhere else. But basically it was the run-ins we had with our own scaling up at this time was we were a little unorganized at that time. Unorganized means licenses, and we had a little electronic, that means all your media, social media, all these things were not in place. Once we started realizing that the social media is the way to go, and also we needed to scale up the activity across the stores, give discounts, tie up with other brands, dealing with social media. This is how we grew our space. Okay. And here we are. Our specialty is mostly cakes and cupcakes, but we also have other items on the menu, but which we consider as a byproduct of ours.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Thanks, Naozad. I want to bring Rahul into discussion, and as you would know, Rahul launched one of the first few chains in the yogurt space, and that's called Coco Berry. And after that, a lot of chains have followed. It's really becoming competitive. So Rahul, would you like to share, in terms of what are the challenges that you faced in the first few years, and with competition catching up, how are you tweaking your model, or are you making any changes to make it more scalable going forward?
Sure. I won't talk too much about whatever mistakes the company may have made in the past, but some of the most structural problems faced in my category and in others. In frozen yogurt, there are 20 brands in the space. We are the only Indian brand. Everybody else is the franchisee of a foreign brand. Almost all those brands start with the word yogurt and end with the word berry. For the customer, it doesn't make any difference. One of the things we have tried to do to differentiate ourselves is to make a product 100% Indian. This is in a category where it was almost 100% foreign. So it was a category where machines were bought from the same suppliers. There are 2 suppliers worldwide. They're like the Coke and Pepsi of machines. They supply to everybody. There are 2 suppliers worldwide for concentrate. They supply to everybody. We've developed machines locally. We've developed concentrate locally, which is cheaper than imported concentrate and better. As far as our customer research was concerned. Similarly with the flavors, packaging and everything. So we are a completely Indian product, and we've customized the product for an Indian customer. I think that's a big source of competitive advantage because that's lowered our cost. A big problem in this industry is that we've got American costs and Indian revenues. It doesn't work that way. If you look at, I mean, sure, there's a huge opportunity in QSR. We all know that billion people, incomes rapidly rising and so on. But if you look at, say, Domino's Pizza or McDonald's, the average ticket size is 120 bucks. Remove tax, it's a little over 100. Typically, that orders for 2 people. So what the average person eats when he or she eats out is just over 50 rupees net of tax. That's the reality, and that's a fraction of what they spend abroad. But your cost base is not very different from what it is abroad. In fact, rents in India are probably higher than several cities in the West. So we are a poor country. The propensity for a customer to pay is limited. The only reason in Cocoberry my bill sizes are double is because a lot of my stores are located in South Delhi and South Bombay. The moment I expand, I'll find a drop in bill values. The other thing that's unique to India, a major challenge, a lot of people, perhaps even investors, sort of say that only 5% of the market is organized, and the moment 5% becomes 10% or 1% becomes 2%, it's huge and the sector will boom. The biggest problem is that the moment you move from unorganized to organized, you're hit with several taxes that your counterparts in the unorganized sector don't pay. That's really a huge problem. So Cocoberry doesn't really compete with other yogurt players. We compete with the roadside kulfi wala. He doesn't have VAT. He doesn't have service tax, which has just gone up. Leaving aside the obvious differences in rent and wages and so on, the problem is that the customer doesn't necessarily want to pay you 20% more just because you're incurring tax and your unorganized competitor is not. That's one of the realities of the business in India that a lot of people don't take into account. Also, while the market may be booming, a lot of people, particularly the media, feel that the success of a chain is related to the number of outlets they have. So you get these headlines, so and so, we'll be opening 100 outlets, 1,000 outlets, we'll open 100 in 2 years, whatever. But nobody really asks how many of these outlets are profitable. In the last year, calendar year 2014, Domino's Pizza, McDonald's, Yum restaurants, the 3 biggest chains in the country, all had negative same-store growth. So you don't open stores, your existing business becomes margin dilutive because you're losing revenue. You start growing. If you look at all the QSR companies that I'm aware of, the revenue growth versus margin growth. Revenue last year came at the cost of margin. So growth is margin dilutive, not growing is margin dilutive. That's a problem, and that's a huge challenge for the industry in India. Just scaling up doesn't necessarily mean that you're profitable. Like it was mentioned in the morning, we are in a situation of winner take all. That's fine, except that the winners so far have not necessarily taken all. The profitability is not terribly high. And as far as food services are concerned, I don't know whether it's a case of survival of the fittest or survival of the richest. So again, I mean, take something like home delivery. Let's say that 20% of your sales come from home delivery. So people feel that there's a huge opportunity. There's mobile, and you can order not just online, not just through your laptop, but on your mobile and so on. But all that is not translated into incremental sale for the restaurant. It's just that the customer has more options, but it remains the same customer ordering the same pizza. He's not necessarily ordering more. Sure, there's some incremental sale, but not as much as what we might like to believe. Again, it's margin dilutive because doing home delivery comes at a cost. So those are some of the challenges that the industry faces.
I think one big challenge which I keep hearing is the lack of talent or lack of people, particularly for the front end. And while you're scaling up, you need a certain profile of people to cater to the customers. And with attrition rates of more than 20%, how do you cope up with that?
Yeah, I think one of the problems specific to India, India and a few other countries in our income level, is that the person selling you a product in any retail category can't afford it. Think about it. A car salesman can't afford a car. The person in Shoppers Stop selling you apparel can't afford that apparel. A person in McDonald's can't afford a burger. So, and given the fact that we are basically we are a class-based society, the relationship between the buyer and seller is like a master-servant relationship. The person selling your product can't really identify with the product and can't really identify with the customer. That's a huge challenge. It's not just low wages and so on. All over the world, people in retail get minimum wage or close to it. But it's just that there's this complete unfamiliarity of the product. The person doesn't understand the product and the customer. It's a huge challenge. It's not too easy to overcome it. What we try to do, for example, in summers is we have interns from college, people who actually are passionate about the brand. And we tell them, come and run a store. It's a great life lesson for you. If you want to do an MBA, it'll be an advantage because you're not just flipping burgers at minimum wage, but you're actually running a store and you'll be responsible for its P&L. So we've got a few people to do that, but that's one of the challenges. It's just that The fact that the person selling it can't really identify with the product. What we also try to do is promote everybody from within. And we have a rule, in 2 years if you're not promoted, you're out. I can't pay somebody more to do the same job. So we try to innovate with various HR practices in that respect.
I'd like to second that. In fact, since we have these many number of stores, I think even in a franchise setup and even in own stores, you will typically have this problem, and especially at the front end where salary levels are at its lowest. I think it's easy meat for new brands coming in. What better than a trained person or a trained counter staff? It's just that the category, the subcategory within that industry would be different. So you'll have people switching over from the pizza industry to the coffee industry, from coffee to ice creams and so on and so forth. But it's just that within that tier, they keep moving. So, you'll see a lot of churn within the cafe industry. People from Cafe Coffee Day moving to, say, a Barista or a Costa, and then, to a Starbucks, just for a few hundreds or, 1,000 here and there. Because that makes a substantial difference to their remuneration. And that is always going to be a pain in a growing economy like us. And let's try and understand that, you have training programs. We spend a lot on training programs. You train a person initially in the brand, you have brand orientation, you run the person through the brand. And then by the time you get back to do your refreshers, the guy is not in the system. So all the time you just keep doing your brand orientation, So typically you train people for the industry and not for your brand.
Want to say something?
Yeah, just one thing. I'm feeling a little depressed being in the food business. So it's not that bad. I think there are too many upsides. These are all, I call them chota challenges. We say that in the Vada Pav business, we have one of the lowest APCs, the average per head spend. And we are buying from a centralized kitchen which is ISO 22000 certified. We have a frozen supply chain which carries the product to all the stores. Of course, we've had to wait because we had to reach our current volume of 50 tons of monthly production, to be able to afford all of these world-class technologies. So I think as entrepreneurs, as people from the food industry, we just need to understand that getting from point A to point B is going to be the pain, after which things, your past problems, of course, they become smoother and you have newer challenges coming up. But the excitement lies in that you can talk of these numbers in a country like India. So I just thought I will liven up the mood a little bit.
Thanks for bringing some optimism in the sector. We have a query coming from Ali from People Capital. Can you stand up or somewhere in the ground? Okay. His query is that, even if the restaurant make profit at the standalone level, but because of high corporate costs, you are still making losses at the corporate level. So is there a way to improve margins so that you can absorb the overheads and the corporate cost? Question is how to improve margins so that you make profit at the chain level, not just at the store level.
So for us, as in it was of course all about scale. So you require the same team, whether you are at 10 stores or at 100 stores, the team does not grow 10 times larger. So, the pace at which you acquire the team and the pace at which you grow the entire chain. So I think if on that curve, if the growth is higher than the rate at which your team is getting built, you are going to make money. So like we are making money, of course it's a very tightly held team, but I think 2008, 2009, we learned some really tough lessons when the entire financial markets had collapsed, because at that time we were living in that exuberance of having CEOs and GM supply chain and marketing on a very small chain. But today, I think it's doing well.
I'd like to give some insight on this. See, now typically we have a set team, okay? And we've been having this team since the time we've had about 250 stores. Now we've achieved this scale. Whatever we need to add in terms of resources at the corporate level is just additions at the operating level, you know. So this has also allowed us to strategically acquire brands because we've got the bandwidth right now. You know, we've got teams across the country, so it's easier to leverage this, you know. So in terms of strategic alliances or strategic investments, this is a great opportunity for us, and we've started doing that. In fact, we have a yogurt chain which we recently acquired, which has about 4 stores. So we are operating it ourselves. Again, leveraging on the bandwidth that we have. We have another retail chain called Meats and More, which is into fresh and chilled meats and seafood. So we plan to scale that up. So and we also have Zafran. You know, we've strategically invested in Zafran, which is a restaurant chain. I mean, otherwise we couldn't have been doing that. So it's you know, it's the same corporate arm that is managing all these brands, and which will manage the scale eventually.
See, I think in simple terms, rule number 1, no unit should go on loss. That's the one which we have to ensure. As Mathur mentioned here, maybe you need to give a time 6 to 9 months. If not working out, you need to close down. Second thing is, because of just going up with more and more, we should not keep increasing our corporate cost. Then we are talking about, instead of having meeting on how to grow the business, we keep talking about how to reduce the cost. I think that is the key things we need to keep in mind when we keep growing. Whatever the scale which you go, try to expand, put it in the front end, because the end user's point, you need to have the efficiencies, otherwise competition will kill you or innovative will come and kill you. So the front end, you need to invest anything. On the back end, you need, answering to Mathu's question, at the back end, you need to have a lean, mean structure at any point of time, and more innovative software for the back-end office, like a SAP and ERPs, whichever is suitable to your model. You need to ensure not adding more people, not adding expensive people. It's only a strategic and seller point of view. You need to have a few people in the corporate. That saves the money for us.
Rahul, there's a question for you from the audience. It says, if you're not promoted in 2 years, you're out. So, you know, if there's a delivery boy who has very minuscule education background, and he's not promoted, you know, what's the career path for him?
Sure. Okay, well, actually, it's a valid question, and if we had delivery boys doing a very, very sort of unintelligent job, then we'd have a problem, and you'd have a fair point. The reason I mentioned that is because shrinkage, or less politely, theft in the store, particularly in the food industry, is a real problem. If you can't meet people's aspirations in terms of salary, they learn to make money from the store in various ways. That's something you have to be very concerned about. You can't increase salary if they do the same job. So if a person's a delivery boy, for example, I can't pay him more and more if he still does the same delivery boy job. I'll try and outsource the delivery to somebody else and not make it my headache. But as far as the stores are concerned, because if we are expanding, we should be able to create opportunities for our people every 2 years. Now, if a person is not smart enough to move up to the next level, I simply can't pay him more to do just the same job. I can give him a couple of increments, but not more than that, because then my wage cost will go through the roof. So, if you're expanding, if he demonstrates that amount of intelligence and aptitude, he can certainly move to the next level. If not, competition will take him, because there is attrition. People move across formats. We are the leader in our category. There are a lot of other players who want to hire people from our restaurant, so we'll be quite happy to let him go somewhere else.
There's another question. How will the delivery engines like Tiny Owl add value to your business? The outsourced delivery business like Swiggy, does it add value at all? Is outsourcing delivery a value proposition for any one of you?
It does add value, but I think typically it's the stores that do their own deliveries. You have better control over that. Because you do not have control over, other websites. They typically aggregate, various company deliveries. So you may or may not get traction, or you may not get enough traction. It all depends on, how you're seen on their portal. But I think when it comes to your brand, you can still build the business independently. And I think we've managed to do that successfully. In fact, Mumbai alone, if you take it in totality, Mumbai, of the total sales, the home delivery business is 18%. which is significant for an ice cream chain. In fact, we have certain stores that do as much as 60%. So I think, and that lends a lot of stability to the business. In fact, some of the stores are extremely profitable.
Now that you want to say something, have you thought of outsourcing delivery?
We have tied up with a few companies which outsource, and there's a new format which they call our store and they tell us to keep the stuff ready, give us a 2-hour notice. If it's not there, we tell them it's not there at the store. So this is really working for us, and we have seen an about 18% increase in home delivery through this model. There is also other things which come into play, which customers get aggravated when there is something on their menu, like he said, and it is not at our particular store. We try and get it from the other store ASAP because we have that 2-hour period. But if we can't, we don't want to upset anyone here. So this is.
But what if the product gets spoiled or damaged during the delivery? Who takes the liability? Are the contracts clear enough on that?
We have a contract with the guys that they will check and inspect the material at the store level. And once it goes out, it's their problem.
Sure.
There is one situation where outsourced home delivery can really hurt you. So there is one player in the space, for example, who seemingly has unlimited funding and is giving across the board discounts of up to 40-50% on home delivery, which the restaurants are not sponsoring, they do it. That creates a dissonance with the customer. He says, why should I buy from you? It's cheaper through the website. And that's a problem. My feeling is that whether it's a Food Panda or Tiny Owl, just working as an aggregator does not really add enough value for the customer because the average customer calls maybe 3 or 4 restaurants. They have the numbers anyway. The only way that the aggregators can remain relevant is if they start giving steep discounts, and there'll be a time when the restaurants don't participate in it. The aggregators will have to do it themselves, and how long they do it is a function of how much money they're willing to lose. So that's one problem.
Yeah. You want to?
I think the way country moving around on the online shopping and thanks to IPL and other things, I think the home deliveries are unavoidable. I think in that case we need to scale up our infrastructure on the home delivery point as our own in-house. But it is not a bad idea when the outsiders also, we can have a partly outsourced also to meet out the requirements. Because the more and more it's going to be online purchase, and I think the people wants to deliver at home, even a small things. For that, I think partly, if you outsource it, it will give you certain top line and without having any other infrastructural cost.
Okay. There's a question for Dheeraj and Sanjay. It's basically how do you develop an organization culture within your company, and is people experience, as an employee's experience, a priority for your businesses? How do you take care of that? So, this thing is employee experience. Is that all a priority for brands like you? And how do you translate into good, positive organizational culture?
Yeah, see, I think we've built a culture in a way that people grow within the organization, and I think that's important. The more you scale, people grow from within the ranks. In fact, personally speaking, the brand was responsible for my growth. Because I started off as a zonal manager for West, and in 7.5 years I had moved out as a chief operating officer. A lot of people within the organization have started working as crew members and have grown up to heads of functions. So I think it's extremely important to ensure that people live the brand. I think it's passion rather than anything else that you need to get people's involvement in. And obviously you need to have that EQ. A lot of companies I feel with technology, they lack that EQ. I think, when the chips are down, that's the time where people need you the most. And more or less leaders, just fire numbers and expect people to achieve without understanding ground realities. I think this is the time where you actually need to coach and mentor people to ensure that they have the right temperament, because the right temperament will actually get you the right leaders. And you need that temperament when the chips are down, especially in the last 1 year or so, the way the blunt industry has been facing the slump. I think this is the time where you'll actually have boys growing to men, as we say.
Want to add something?
I completely agree with Sanjay, of course, and the only thing that I'd probably like to add over here is the team that is required when you're growing the business, say from 0 to the 10th store, is going to be different from the team that you'll require, the skill sets growing from the 10th to the 100th, and it kind of, so just telling the people who are there with you from the 0 to 10 journey that the brand is learning, the promoter is learning, as a team they need to learn, because you can't become a government organization where you will be there only because you were there for so many years. So, telling them that this is what is coming up and what skills they require, I think that is something which has worked well for us.
I think we are out of time, so we can take any more questions offline during the lunch time. I must thank all the panelists for their wonderful views and all the audience for their patience. Thank you.
Thank you.